All right, there we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final session in our 7-week series, A Campaign of Consciousness. Things are a little bit different this evening as Lisa and I are on vacation here in beautiful St. Augustine, Florida, just a couple of hours outside of Orlando. Uh, we had a Elliot, since you're here, I'll just mention we had a lovely lunch this afternoon with none other than Jack O'Keefe, due to your prompting.
That is fantastic.
Yeah,
That's great.
it was lovely. She was very, very wonderful. And so we're just here enjoying ourselves. And but I wanted to make sure that we took time out for this evening's discussion and to continue in our campaign of consciousness series. So, as I like to start each session with a reminder that, for anyone who's participating online, if you prefer your anonymity or want to keep things private, you're welcome to keep your cameras off, your microphones off. That's all fine. And share only if you're comfortable. And, also just keep in mind, to take what's meant for you and to leave the rest behind. It doesn't look like we have too many people on this evening, which is quite fine. But if you're watching this afterwards via a video recording, just keep the same thing in mind. These conversations can be a little challenging to the psychological structures of the mind, to our conditioned ways of thinking, and that's sort of on purpose. That's what helps break us out of the mental knowing, the mental abstractions that keep us entrapped in the systems and structures of mind and in the inherent limitations of language. To be challenged or to feel ourselves being challenged, to think differently or to look at life through a different lens or from a different perspective is really a tremendous gift if we're willing to see it that way, if we're willing to experience it that way. The other thing that I would say is last week, we ended on the note of being wary of our traps. And I outlined several sort of very direct examples of how we entrap ourselves and how we keep ourselves sort of limited. The kinds of things that happen, the kinds of the different forms of mental abstraction that can contribute to our confusion. And I really spoke quite plainly about the importance of not really being able to stand anywhere, of not really being able to attach to any one particular way of seeing or thinking, not to attach to any one path or teacher, to be really open, to be really flexible in the way that we're approaching ourselves and in the way that we're approaching our journey. Because that sort of flexibility and that openness is what facilitates a deepening, a different form of living, a different way of seeing and being that's much more open, much more gracious, much more humble and tender and kind and loving and compassionate. A way of being that is much more wise and in tune with our own heart. And so it's again, there were a lot of things that I covered last time in being wary of our traps, and I had said at the end of that session that I was going to open tonight up with an opportunity to ask questions. So whether you're here with me on Zoom or you're on Facebook Live, and I know it takes a few seconds for Facebook Live to catch up. So I just want to start by holding the space open for any questions or points of clarification that anyone might find useful on any subject at all. It doesn't even necessarily need to be related to the things we've covered throughout the course. And I'm watching my image here on Facebook Live as it's just now saying the last thing I said. So a little bit of a delay. All right. Let me just recap on a few things then, and then I'll open it up again to questions. Maybe we can inspire some conversation. So far, as a part of this series, we spoke in our first session about tilting in the direction of awakening. And I was describing a spiritual awakening as a fundamental shift in conscious perception, right? How we see beyond language, beyond the limits of language. We have been conditioned to see words as things. We have been conditioned to construct a world of abstraction out of words, out of language. And that language, the conditioned sort of attachment to language, creates so many different systems and structures, right? So it creates the notions and the views and the ideas and the beliefs that then give shape and meaning and dimensionality to our lives, both good and bad, both positive and negative. For instance, the idea that, you know, my life has meaning and purpose is a wonderful idea. It really is, until we find that sense of meaning and purpose threatened in some way. And then the sense of self that's identified with that structure of meaning purpose is also threatened. So we take any threat against our devotion to meaning and purpose to be a threat against ourselves. So that's an example of how something can be really beautiful in one way and also very challenging in another. Another example that we might have, we can take it on to the other side, right? When we have a conversation with ourselves about how I'm not good enough, right? Or I'm not getting it right. Yeah. Or I'm not there yet. We talked a lot about that one last week as well. Okay? So each and every one of these is a proposition formed in words, constructed out of language. It takes the I thought and gives it shape and dimensionality, and then it attaches a quality to the I thought. Another set of thoughts attaches a quality to the I thought. I am not good enough. I am not getting it right. I am not there yet, right? And in each and every case, if we look closely, the entire conversation we're having with ourselves is constructed out of language, and it only exists in language. And in the absence of language, so too do those beliefs themselves fall away. Yeah. So you often hear spiritual teachers, especially in non-dual traditions, talking about the value of silence. Yes. Because in that silence, in that wordless dimension of being, that's the place in which we're no longer limited or defined by words or language. That's why you also hear so many non-dual teachers or awakened or realized beings talking about how difficult it is to try to express this in language, how it's really quite impossible. Because what we're talking about is an experiential point of reference in our own being, something that's very direct and experiential. It is not something that can be captured in language. It can't be constrained. It cannot be constrained or contained by language. So that's a lot of what we spoke about in the very first session. To understand that a spiritual awakening is not a sort of transcendent mystical experience so much as it is a seeing through, right? Recognizing the transparency of mind and arriving at something that's just beyond the edges of mind, yeah? Just outside of its purview. All right, I have a question here. That's wonderful. Okay. Do you need the self when making decisions? Since the self, okay, since that wants. do you need the self when making decisions, since the wants the makes the decisions? I'm having a little trouble with the question here. Let me see if I can just interpret what we're asking. That which makes decisions needs a self. Okay, so this is an interesting question, and it's a beautiful question. Let's slice and dice this a little bit in terms of the game of appearances, versus sort of the we could call it the objective reality that exists beyond the interpretive mechanics of mind. Right. So whenever we get into a conversation about self and not self, we're already in the mechanics of a duality, right? We're trying to define or limit or constrain or give meaning to our experience of reality. And one fundamental question within the experience of reality, within our experience of reality, is the question of the self. This is the central question. Now, non-dual teachers will often talk about the self from two perspectives, as if we could say that the self is a coin, and on one side we have the small self, right? The individual, independent sense of I that we take to be real and true, that which is constructed out of mind, right? And then on the other side of the coin, we have the self with a capital S. Yeah. And the self with a capital S is the felt sense of our own being, just the recognition of ourselves as this aware presence, without dimension, without form, without name, without labels, right? It's just it's isness. The quality of its isness is all there is to it. And it's an issue of presencing more than it is about trying to turn it into a thing, right? So on one side of this coin, we have a small self, right? We could call that the egoic self, right? And on the other side of this coin, we have the true self, the aware self, the presence of our own being. We could say things like that. Whenever we have these conversations, though, it's sort of a question of where are we at in our own understanding of the nature of self. If we're living on the small side of the coin, right, then there has to be a conversation about what's on the other side of the coin. And so there is an important conversation to be had about the small self versus the self with a capital S. You know, the larger self, the universal self, the uncontained, the limitless, right? But as we go through this process of investigation for ourselves, at a certain point, we need to throw the damn coin away. Which is really, it's central, right? To coming into deeper contact with that which is without shape, name, form, or definition. Because when we're having that conversation about, is there a self, is there no self, is there, you know, a self with a small s versus a capital S? These are all constrained by language. They're ways that we're working to communicate with one another to share conceptual frames of reference. And it's beautiful to do that up until a certain point. That point, as I like to work with people to discover for themselves, is the point at which it causes let's say, discomfort, dissatisfaction, suffering in our experience, right? When you hit that wall that says something like, you know, in the context of decision making, right? What we'll often find ourselves asking is, am I making the right decision? Or how do I know how to make the right decision? Or what happens if I make the wrong decision? How can I avoid making the wrong decision? Yeah. Now, when we believe ourselves, when we're still sort of captured by the thought I as the dominant means of identification, that small I has these sort of questions. The mental I, the abstraction of I, has these sorts of questions because it sees itself or experiences itself as independent, right? As apart from, as separate. And when we're in that place, when we see ourselves independent and separate and apart from, then absolutely there are questions about how do I make decisions? How do I get from here to there? How do I make sure that I make the right decision? And so there's a lot of sort of knowledge-based mechanics that go into that, right? What kind of research can I do? How do I intuit, to a certain degree, right? There are all these, what we could call strategies, right? There are all these sorts of strategies that we might apply to the process of decision making in order to make sure that we make the right decision and avoid making the wrong decision. But all of that is predicated upon the assumption that the self is independent and apart from and separate. Yeah. If we begin to sort of look very closely at the nature of the constructed mental abstraction of I and are able to see through it as a border or as a boundary established only in language and conditioned into our experience as a mental pattern, a formation, if we can see through that, what we begin to discover is the wholeness of life itself, right? That which is without borders, without boundaries, without limits. It doesn't have any single independent quality to be found anywhere. So, and we could say that this wholeness, this fullness that emerges in our direct experience, what we see when we see through the abstractions of mind, it has its own intelligence. I like to refer to it as the intelligent aliveness of life that's expressing and experiencing itself as everything there is, without there being any parts. There are no parts, not a single separate, distinguishable, or distinct entity exists anywhere. It can't be found. It can only be found when you're limited by language. Here I am as a separate self, there you are as a separate self, and here we are living lives as, here we are living separate lives. And my life is inhabited by things, It's dominated by things, by people, places, ideas, and experiences. When we've seen through all that, and we sort of honor the wholeness of life itself, and we've seen through the abstraction of the separate self, right? And we've seen into the non-separate nature of reality as it is, then if a decision needs to be made, a decision will be made. Life itself is making the decision through you, right? Life itself is expressing itself in the form of a question that we interpret as a decision. And then we bring all of our faculties and all of our resources to bear in order to try to answer that question. But all those faculties and resources are also none other than the wholeness and the fullness of life and its intelligence. Yeah. So, and then when we make our decision, right, it's the appearance of a decision having been made. Right? It's just the appearance of a decision that has been made. But the sort of finality of the decision itself cannot be any other than a decision made in accord with the whole. Because you're not a separate self and not apart from the whole, only the whole can make that decision, right? So the decision was made without your involvement, no matter how it may appear. And life is going to always place you in exactly the position that life needs you to be in. Yeah. And this is why you also hear so many awakened beings or teachers or enlightened people or whatever, they're talking about service, let thy will be done, kind of language, right? Because we're not caught in the abstraction of a separate self. We understand this intelligent aliveness to be the truth of our being. And so we surrender, right? We surrender very deeply into that intelligence. We have faith and we have trust in the unfolding of life. We understand and recognize through our own direct experience that life is fulfilling itself through us. right? That life is living each and every one of us in accord with its own purpose. Now, I'm not going to try to get into what is the purpose of life. That seems a little abstract. This is much more about the practicality of our own experience and trying to get to the answer, the question of decision making, right? Again, only the separate self is concerned about making a mistake, because it believes such things are possible. But when we're really very aware of the non-separateness of all things, right? The wholeness of all things, and that's impossible. It really is impossible. Even if something happens in our life that feels like a mistake, just reflect for a moment on the number of mistakes you've made in your life that have contributed to the wisdom you have now. Right? And could the wisdom that you have now have been achieved in any other way than having lived through all of the things that you quote unquote did wrong? And the answer is always going to be no. I am where I am in my experience of myself and in my understanding of life because of all the things that I have been through. And so we take a different perspective from this place, and we recognize the things that we have done in our lives that have been difficult or contributed to our pain and suffering were really shaping and molding and preparing us for something more. Yeah. I was speaking with someone today who's a non-dual teacher, and I was sharing with her a line that I had heard a long time ago about how if you want to be a non-dual teacher, you have to be prepared to crawl through broken glass and rusty nails, right? Why would that be? Because in order for someone to be a non-dual teacher, a real authentic teacher of non-dual understanding, one must have encountered pretty much all of the different areas of confusion that mind will experience. And it has to have, that person playing that role must have experienced all those things themselves directly. Yeah. So each and every one of us is being shaped and molded to be of service to the wholeness and the fullness of who it is that we truly are. Yeah. And so the only real decision that we need to make in our lives, if I could say it that way, is the decision to find out who we are. Yeah. That's the most important decision, to bring all of our willingness, our openness, our earnestness, and our sincerity to answering the question, who is it that I truly am? And giving ourselves over to that, we have to want the truth more than we want to breathe. Because tonight's conversation, right, is about the dance of fear and surrender, right? If we really want the truth, right, the truth asks that we stand in complete uncertainty, that we stand in not knowing, right? That we're completely open to whatever life asks of us in any given moment. So there's nowhere to stand, and there's no one to be, and there's nothing to do. We're just here. And that's very terrifying to a mind that has committed itself to its individuality. Yeah. And is fearful of trying to fearful of getting things wrong. So does the self with a capital S need the small self in order to make a decision? The answer to that question is only if there's a distinction between the two. Yeah. But the small self is none other than the large self, the capital self, right? It's none other. I like to use the Christian sort of formulation of omnipresence, right? God is everywhere all at once. Yeah? But here we are in our experience of ourselves, and we say, yeah, but not in me. Yeah, God's everywhere but here. Yeah. Here I am. I'm the one that's getting it wrong. I need to figure out new strategies and new ways to make better decisions so I can avoid painful situations that might occur. And the deeper reality is any painful situation that we find ourselves in is there in order to teach us and shape us and mold us and call us to be in service to the truth of our own being. So the only decision that we have to make is how much earnestness are we going to bring to this question of who we are, to this process of inner investigation. Any other question is really just a distraction. It's just the mind sort of trying to find something else to leverage or use as a vehicle for finding an answer, right? So that we can make better decisions. So I don't know if that helps or if that gets to the root of the question, but that's my response to that.
Bradley?
Yes, please.
Just this is just a bit of a messenger transmission
Sure.
that I heard A.H. Almas, who's also called Hamid, the author of The Diamond Approach, talking with Tammy Simon not too long ago, the publisher of Sounds True.
Right. Yeah.
And he said to Tammy about decisions. He goes, "Oh, decisions! Oh my God, I haven't made a decision in 10 years."
Right.
You know what I mean? He's just flowing with that which is deciding.
Yes.
And so that's for the what it's worth department. I thought that was interesting.
Yes, that's really beautiful. And I think I've listened to that particular talk maybe a couple of months ago.
Wow.
It's a wonderful talk. I love his depth and clarity. It's really beautiful. And just for those who are not familiar, Sounds True has devoted itself to sharing, all kinds of wonderful authors and spiritual teachers. And she does, Tammy Simon, she does interviews every week through a podcast called The Edge of, At the Edge, I think, something like that. Anyway, I highly recommend it. She speaks with a lot of very clear teachers, therapists, people who have really devoted themselves to this understanding and to sharing it and inviting other people into it. So yes, thank you for sharing that. And that's my experience too, right? Each and every day I have the experience of decision making. No question about it. Every single day, there are decisions being made all day long, right? And they appear to be happening within the context of Bradley, right? And that is sort of the way it looks. But at no point do I fool myself into believing that that's the actual way that things are moving. Yeah? My experience has shown me quite clearly that the non-separateness, that the wholeness, right? As we're emptied out, right? That the wholeness replaces any sort of idea of individuality that we may have. And so it's acknowledged, even though that it may appear that decisions are being made, there's an understanding or a recognition, who is the ultimate decision maker here? Who is the doer of all my doings? Yeah. And could that doer be any other than the doer of all doings? And so it's, so we have to work within the context. Last week I was talking, and several times throughout this course, right, I've been talking about the play of paradox, and that both are equally true. Here I am making a decision and no decision is being made. Both are true, right? And it only becomes a paradox when we're in the thinking mind that needs it to be one way or the other. But I would agree with A.H. Almas. I haven't made a decision in 5 years. I would go so far as to say I haven't made a decision since my own birth, right? So it's interesting to look at questions like this and to examine them again from the position of is there a separate self that can be found apart from the whole? And if there isn't a separate self that can be found apart from the whole, anything other than a mental abstraction anyway, then where do these decisions come from? Yeah, who's making them? Even if we were to say, for instance, that you are the maker of all your decisions, right? That's sort of a heavy load to bear, right? Wouldn't every life event or historical moment in your life contribute to the direction in which the decision is made? And even in the realm of decision making itself, aren't the options from which you're making a decision rather finite, dependent upon the conditions that apply? Meaning, if you're trying to make a particular decision about how to be within a particular social structure, don't the expectations of that social structure limit the range of options that you can decide upon, right? So in any way, shape, or form that we begin to believe that we are or have the capacity for any sort of independent decision making, it really is worth investigating. You can investigate it from multiple different angles to get to the place where you understand that, you're operating out of, right? There's something larger than you, right? Your idea of yourself. There's something larger than your idea of yourself that's at work in everything being the way that it is. Yeah. That's one of the biggest and most important parts of realization. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Elliot. It's really beautiful. Okay. So like I was just recapping on the first session that we did, tilting in the direction of awakening. And please feel free to throw more questions out. I'll stop and hit them as we go. But the second session that we did was on love yourself, trust yourself, and honor your own journey, right? Really challenging the question of whether or not we love ourselves. If you look at your own life, is your life consistent with the life of someone who would love themselves? Are you exposing yourself to things that are unloving, unkind, unhelpful? Are you living a life of chaos and despair? These are important questions to ask ourselves and to be honest with ourselves about, so that we can then begin to move more and more in the direction of self-care. Again, getting away from the idea whether there is or isn't a self. There is the experience of being, right? And within the experience of being, we talk about the importance of kindness, right? Why wouldn't you start by just being kind to yourself? By being kind and loving, tender with your own self, with your own experience of yourself, right? Just being very practical, Doesn't need to be an existential question. Just a very simple question. Am I living a life that demonstrates that I care about my own well-being, that I care about my own happiness? These are important questions. And really trusting, developing or cultivating a sense of trust in our capacity, our ability, the unfolding of our own being, to really develop and cultivate a sense of trust in the way that life is moving through us and offering itself to us, to really be present with that. And then to honor our own journey, because I was talking to somebody the other day who said, I really want to discover what the Buddha discovered. And I was very clear in saying, you will never, ever, ever discover what the Buddha discovered. You will only discover what is meant for you. So we can't live the life of another. Yeah. We cannot have the experience of another. It has to be, even the Buddha was very clear on this point. You have to experience it for yourself. These are just pointers. But it has to happen here for you. And so that's the truth of the matter, right? This isn't, this isn't something that anyone can do for you. The realization or the recognition of your own true being is not something that can be found through another, nor can it be found by walking the path of another. Now, I'm not going to say that isn't useful or helpful. Of course, it's useful and helpful to devote yourself to a path or a practice, but only for so long as it supports and nourishes your search, right? But at a certain point, your search for truth needs to be about the truth, not about someone else's interpretation of it. It needs to be your own discovery, uniquely suited to who you are and what your life has been about, and what life is asking of you, what it's calling you to be of, how it's calling you to be of service. This is essential to honor your own journey. Yeah? You could sit in a room with 10 different non-dual teachers who are all very clear and very deep. And as they're speaking, they will all nod to each other and they will all say yes. But it sounds like they're saying very different things, but they're not. They're each honoring their own recognition, their own relationship with a deeper truth, with something they know to be more true than their ideas, their notions, their views, and their beliefs. Yeah. So honoring your own journey, really essential. So that was the second session. In the third session, we talked about mindfulness and meditation, yeah, and how to use several of these various techniques in order to experiment, right? In order to experiment within our experience of ourselves, and also, uh, to create some distance, right, between the machinations of mind. Here I am. I'm experiencing this system of thought, and completely ingrained and entangled with those systems and structures of thought. So much so that I think myself to be my thoughts, right? But by practicing mindfulness and meditation, we begin to open up a bit of a distance between ourselves, this aware presence, this being, this quality of aliveness, the bare cognition, right? However we want to frame it, that's all fine. But but we create some space so that we can see, oh, well, if I can see my thoughts, I'm not my thoughts. If I can witness it, if I can see it, then who's the I that sees it? You know, that's such an important question. So these tools, mindfulness and meditation techniques, they can be very helpful in giving us some space so that we can look and examine for ourselves. Now, they also give us tools that we can use when we find ourselves in great difficulty in our own experience, right? You go through some sort of painful event, right? A loved one walks out the door, or someone dies, or you lose your home, or whatever it may be, and so you're in this sense of overwhelm, and just being able to acknowledge the sense of crisis in your experience, and then to use centering techniques in order to just really inhabit the experience, to dwell in your own heart center, right? These are very powerful, very important ways that some of these techniques can come forward in our lives. And of course, to me, the most important one, and the one that I like to really highlight, is the importance of really breathing into the heart, really being present from the position of our own heart center, right? To make so much of our own work about opening the heart, dropping the mind down into the heart, clearing the mind and opening the heart. These are all different ways of saying it. But so many people, right? We have questions, right? Even things about decisions, right? What do I do? How do I do it? And we're busy trying to accumulate knowledge as a mind, right? So the more knowledge we have, the better we'll be able to make our decisions. But there's something more profound than knowledge. I said earlier in lunch with someone, we were talking, another non-dual teacher, and we were having this conversation, and I said, well, wisdom trumps knowledge. Wisdom always trumps knowledge. And when we open our hearts, it's like turning on the spigot of wisdom. Yeah. There's something emerges from the heart. The heart begins to feed wisdom, into the systems and structures of mind. We could say that the heart, when the heart opens, wisdom emerges naturally and begins to permeate absolutely every aspect of our experience. And so it's like even the thoughts, and the relationship that we have with ourselves, and all of it's infused with the wisdom of the heart. So a lot of these techniques, especially the heart breath and centering ourselves in the space of the heart, it's about discovering. It's about discovering what love really is, right? The kingdom of God is here, right? It's right in you. The ultimate treasure, right? X marks the spot, so we cross our hearts. Goodness gracious, you can look in 1,000 different directions, and you can see this conversation about the importance of the heart center as fundamental or foundational to all of them. Yeah. So that's what we spent a lot of time in our third session on. And then we talked about facing and letting go of our pain. Yeah. So much of us we have wounds that have been unhealed. We have traumas that we've carried around for our whole lives. We have a lot of things that are happening unconsciously in our own experience because we've never taken the time to question what our conscious experience is about. We find ourselves sort of living our lives on automatic pilot. Yeah. And then and then we begin to notice there are certain themes that will repeat themselves in our lives. Why do I keep dating the same kind of person? Why do I keep taking the same kind of job? Even though I know that these things will make me unhappy, why do I keep doing this? We're committed to a pattern because we've never made the pattern itself conscious. The things that lead to us, going through that pattern again, we've never made those things conscious. And if you've never made things conscious, right? If you're living an unconscious life, then of course it's on autopilot. You're not even alive. There's the movie or the show, The Walking Dead. I used to joke around about, if we're living an unexamined life, we are very much the Walking Dead. And we don't even know it. We're committed to the way life looks and is considered socially acceptable. And we're like, okay, yeah, that's living. And yet we're deeply disconnected, disillusioned, we're disappointed. We want things to be different than the way that they are, and we're very committed to trying to change the world in order to suit our preferences. Yeah, but a lot of that is really coming from these wounded places, these parts of ourselves that we haven't been able or willing to explore, that we haven't had the capacity or the willingness to go into. And this is where most people fall down. Let me just put it this way and just be very direct with it. Most people do not want to do the hard work of encountering themselves. They don't want to do the hard work of encountering their emotional wounding. It's much easier to distance ourselves from what needs attention. And this is why you will find many people in non-dual circles who's have become attached. Non-duality is I am awareness, and I am awareness only, and only awareness is, and therefore I don't need to encounter my life because there is no life, it's just awareness, right? Well, that's a really easy way to bypass and ignore and distance yourself from absolutely every aspect of your life that's calling for your attention, that's calling for your love. I mean, from my perspective, if everything is consciousness, right, and your consciousness, right, if everything's awareness and your awareness, right, then aren't we talking about a degree of intimacy? Yeah, we're talking about an intimacy with ourselves as this that is. And intimacy means everything. Intimacy means allowing for everything. And so the intimacy that we're called to in this work is to be intimate with our entire range of experience, not just the in and out breath of I am awareness, but with everything that's coming and emerging alongside and with the in and out breath of I am awareness. I am awareness, and awareness is breathing in and out, and awareness is living life, and life continues to happen. Or as I was saying, and again, my lunch, Lisa and I met with a non-dual teacher here in St. Augustine. We had a lovely lunch. And we were joking about, there's a point at which you arrive at, you'll meet somebody who says, oh, I'm awareness. And you're like, yeah, so am I. So what? So what? It doesn't matter. Life goes on. Life continues. If you think for one moment that awakening or enlightenment is about a transcendent experience, then the only person you're fooling is yourself. And until you discover the truth of that, enjoy the ride. It's not going to go anywhere near the destination that you have in mind. Again, we're talking about a complete intimacy with every aspect of experience, all the things we like and all the things that we don't like. Okay? That's where real willingness is coming forward. An earnestness, a sincerity in living life in all its ugly, raw, and demanding dimensions. Not just, having a kumbaya moment until your last breath. That's not what any of this is about. It never has been. Another thing that comes forward in recognition of the nature of the self, of who and what we truly are, is that you've always been this. So if you've always been this, then isn't all the pain and the suffering that you've already experienced throughout your life also none other than this, right? So, and why would you think that that's going to change just because you have this understanding? Life was always doing what life does. Life is going to continue to do what life does. Here you are. The only thing that's shifted, the only thing that's changed is your ability to see beyond the separate self that's so entrenched. Now, what's changed, what's shifted is this quality or recognition or willingness to let life do what life does without being in resistance to it. Yeah. That's intimacy. That's being really deeply connected with who we truly are. It's not a transcendent vehicle. It's not out of body, It isn't walking on little cloud, little pillows with little pillows on our feet as if it's a cloud that we're just dancing on with a harp and we're already angels floating around in heaven. It's not any of that. You have to be willing to encounter heaven and hell in equal measure if you want to understand what heaven is. Yeah, there's no way around it. So facing and letting go of our pain is very much about that willingness to encounter ourselves and to question, to examine, to look deeply, and to be radically honest with ourselves about what needs attention, what needs love, what needs clarity, where our work is, and to meet it all. Then we talked about synchronicity. Yeah, we talked about the way that life is demonstrating to us its absolute beauty and perfection by showing us through the play of synchronicity that there's something else at work, that there's something larger at work, and then it knows what it's doing. Some of the examples we used were very contained, right, in terms of you're having a difficult experience, you've got something running through your mind, and you're walking down the street and somebody comes walking towards you and they're wearing a t-shirt that speaks to exactly what you're going through, right? And so you might say to yourself, oh, that's weird, or what a coincidence, or oh my, right? Or you recognize it as a synchronistic moment. Yeah. And that's beautiful, but there's something deeper at work, because then if you really explore the nature of the synchronistic moment, yeah, what had you on that street at that moment? What had them on that street at the moment? What inspired them to put that shirt on that morning? When did they buy the shirt? And that person, for them to be there, they had to have been born, and for them to have been born, their parents had to have been born. And so in order for the moment to arise, the moment of perfect synchronicity, everything else had to be perfect too. Yeah. And when we begin to acknowledge the absolute perfection inherent in life as it is, always and without fail, then again, we're starting to edge into what's more deeply true than our idea of a separate self that's independent from the whole. And we begin to witness the intelligent aliveness of life at work in every corner and every dimension of our lives. And we can cultivate a sense of faith and trust in that intelligent aliveness. That's what we're surrendering to. That's what we're giving ourselves over to. That's what we're recognizing as love, right? As love, not love as an emotional state or a feeling state or a belief or a demand or an expectation, but love is the inherent quality of our being, because only the self is. We can say it that way. Only the self is. The self with a capital S. Everything is that self. Okay? And you can call it God or Tao or being or consciousness or presence. You can use whatever word works for you. Everything is of that singular nature. Yeah. And because everything is of that singular nature, you are of that singular nature. And that you're not, there's nothing to be fearful of, because there's no, everything is you. Everything is this love. Everything is this love. If there's only the self here and the self is recognized as the self, then love, of course, permeates it all. So you see love as a central theme in the lives of those who have really opened themselves up to this. And again, who are living from the heart, right? So that synchronicity is it can be really beautiful, and it can, when we look at hindsight, when we look at our lives in hindsight, we can often see the beauty, the way in which life, as I said earlier, is shaping us and molding us and preparing us for whatever's next. We don't need to get caught up in what's next. We don't need to have any sort of mental conversation with ourselves about what life is shaping or molding us into or asking of us, but just being really present with what's here now. And you're able to sort of begin to see that your life has always been working in accord with an intelligence, even when you didn't like it. And that's really an important thing, even when you didn't like it. So now when you encounter things from this understanding, you encounter things that you don't like, you can encounter them in a way that says, I don't like this, but I'm sure it's going to lead somewhere. I'm absolutely certain it has something beautiful to teach me, that it's showing me what needs my attention, that it's revealing what needs my love. The dark night of the soul is one of the terms that we might use for this. And, we will encounter these kinds of relinquishing experiences over and over and over again throughout our lives. It doesn't matter how awake we are. We're always called to awaken more deeply. We're always called to be of greater service to this that we are. And when our devotion is to being of service to this that we are, then we give ourselves over and surrender to this intelligence. And we go in whatever direction it takes us. Or as I like to say, we're just along for the ride. But you're along for the ride anyway. So it's sort of like you might as well embrace it and say yeehaw. So we talked about synchronicity. And then we also last week, we talked about being wary of our traps, right? And that's where I was going in depth with sort of a laundry list of all the different ways that we entrap ourselves and constrain ourselves and limit ourselves. Yeah. And that leads us into tonight's conversation about the dance of fear and surrender. Okay? And so I've already alluded to what this is about as in my recap here. If all your life you've been devoted and dedicated to the conditioned mechanics of mind, if your sense of identity is bound up in your name and address and occupation, right, and political affiliation and religious ideology, right, then you are very much caught in the net of duality, very much caught in the sense of a separate self, or the idea or the notion or the belief in a separate self. And this is how you have given shape to that separate sense of self. This is what keeps you bound up. The way in which we have allowed all the various forms of mental abstraction to become us. Yeah. And then someone comes along and they say to you, none of that's true. It's all founded on, these are steps along a conceptual ladder, or steps up a conceptual ladder. And the conceptual ladder gets more and more complicated the higher we climb, and you wonder at a certain point why there's so much complexity, so much demand, why it's all so hard. Well, it's because the investment that we've made in our experience of ourselves and in our experience of life is an investment that we've made in an illusion or in a false idea or false premise. And ultimately, an illusion itself, it cannot be fulfilling. Alan Watts used to talk about how most people, it's like going to the restaurant, right? And instead of using the menu in order to order food, you eat the menu. There's no nourishment in the menu. So that's what most of us are doing. We're eating the menu. There's no fulfillment. There's no nourishment. And that's what we're experiencing. If there's no nourishment in your life, then of course you're going to feel that. It's going to feel heavy and weighty and disconnected and difficult and challenging, you know, and that is not what life is about, and it's not what life needs to be. But you have to be brave enough in your experience of yourself to challenge the entire structure that's given birth to this identity. You have to be willing to do that kind of work within yourself. That's why I said earlier, you have to want the truth more than you want to breathe, not someone else's version of the truth or notion of the truth or belief about the nature of truth, but your own direct experience of truth as that which is without limit or boundary. Truth is that which cannot actually be defined through the mechanics of language. If truth is anything at all, it's the thing you can never quite get a hold of, ever. Because the moment that you feel like you've gotten a hold of it, it vanishes from your fingertips. And it keeps us off balance. The truth keeps you off balance. Why would the truth, if love is the essence or the nature of the truth, why would it keep you off balance? So that you will not invest in anything other than it. Do you understand? If your investment is in your idea of yourself or your idea of the truth or your idea of life, then you've invested in an illusion. You're taking part in a scheme, we could say. Yeah. And so what life does is life says, look, you know, I'm a mystery. Life says, I am beyond your ability to ever understand. I, the truth, can only be lived. That's all. I, the truth, can only be lived. And then the life says, anything other than the truth of being lived is an investment that you're making in something that's untrue. And every time you make an investment in something that's untrue, I'm going to poke you with a stick. Yeah. So that's that's what we experience so much in our lives. You're invested in something that's untrue, poke. Ow, that hurt. I don't like it. Okay, now what are you going to do? Are you going to continue to invest in what's untrue? Or are you going to begin to open yourself up to new ways of seeing and being that are not dependent upon or constructed out of falseness? That's really grounded in not knowing, really grounded in mystery, right? That's so essential. So absolutely essential. And so again, this is what this can do for somebody who's heavily invested in their idea of themselves. This can inspire great fear. Not just a moment of fear or a sense of fear. It can be a reoccurrent theme, right? You're walking in the mall and suddenly you have this insight, right? The insight comes and it goes, life is not found in material objects. Right? Poof, poof, life is not found in material objects. But here you are in the mall with 3 bags of material objects. Yeah. And suddenly you're like, wait a minute, I'm doing it all wrong. Right there, it's a moment of a moment of fear. It's a reaction, right? It's a reaction to, uh-oh, I'm getting it wrong. Yeah. But really what it more so is this opportunity. Here's this insight, right? Here's this insight. Life is not found in these physical objects. Ah, yes, you're right. But at the same time, life itself is living itself through me and here present, right? And this is what's here. This is what's happening. This is what is. The isness of this is where I am. And you come into contact with the isness of life as it is in that moment. And you can hold all of it, right? You can allow for all of it. You can allow for, oh my God, I have all these material objects. Oh my God, I had this insight. It's not about material objects. Oh, look, now I'm actually responding to, it's not about material objects from this position of fear, saying, oh, I might be getting it wrong. And then you can watch and you can see how your mind is telling, oh, I always get it wrong. I'm always doing this. Oh, and you can watch the whole play. and be really present with all of it and know for yourself as a fact that none of it's true. But we have to be willing to sort of allow for all of that to happen. Can you see how if we have a belief in a false notion of enlightenment to some sort of transcendent state, okay, how that puts us on a pedestal and sets us up so that when you have this moment of insight and you have all the wild, crazy, wacky ideas that come forward in that moment, right? That the first thing, if that's your idea of enlightenment, isn't the first thing you're going to do is shut the whole thing down and distance yourself from the whole thing? Oh, none of this is true. I'm just going to depart from it. And you breathe a couple times and you just stop being a part of the moment. But there's no intimacy in that. There's no intimacy in that. You know, encounter the beauty of what life is offering, what life is doing through you, how life is expressing itself as an aspect of itself through you. Bear witness to the fullness and the beauty of who you are in this moment. Who you're never not. That's so central. Who you're never not. You're never not this understanding. You're never not this beingness. You're never not this intelligent aliveness of life. You're never not God. You're never not consciousness. You're never not being. You're never not present or presence. Never not. Yeah. So again, you know, we can, this dance of fear, right, that comes forward. I'm getting it wrong. I'm doing it wrong. I missed it. I misunderstood. I don't have it. I'm not awake yet. All of this, it's all happening. And it's all dependent upon a system of belief that has no reality to it because it's constructed out of the meaning that's born in words. And words, what is a word? I mean, you know, there's a wonderful set of movies called Samadhi, and I've heard this term used by other teachers as well, or this language used by other teachers as well, where, you know, they basically say, you know, a small child sees a bird for the very first time, right? And it's a magical moment. Yeah. And then a parent will say, oh, that's a bird, right? And suddenly the beauty and the fluidity and the mystery of bird takes the shape of the word bird, and the child will never see a bird again. The child will forever see only their definition of what a bird is. What a limited way to experience life, to mistake language as reality. So this is, you know, when we're confronted with these kinds of things again, it can, okay, well, who am I without my idea of myself? It can be very frightening. But it's really just the mind responding and reacting to the possibility of its own absence from the play of things. Yeah. So it reasserts itself. What the mind will do is it brings fear, uncertainty, and doubt to the forefront of its own defense. And it uses fear, uncertainty, and doubt as a way to distract us from continuing to do the inner work, the inner examination, to be present with the fear, uncertainty, and doubt as it appears, to watch it, to see whether or not any of what the fear, the uncertainty, and the doubt has to say is true. Last week we were talking and someone had brought up the question about, you know, well, what if I have a thought about this and I'm having this conversation with myself and, you know, I'm creating all this anxiety for myself. Well, yeah, that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about here. We get locked into this cycle where, you know, it's, we'll spend 90% of our time rehearsing and preparing for a conversation. And then we'll have because we want to be in control of the conversation. Then we'll have the conversation. And when we come out of the conversation, 90% of what we rehearsed is unnecessary. And yet we put so much time, so much effort, and so much energy into the process of trying to manipulate the situation that we've been exhausted by it, even though the conversation itself was something probably very simple. We're very, very much invested in this way of thinking and this way of engaging with each other, and this way of engaging with ourselves. Very exhausting. And then when we can be really present, oh, I'm not sure what's going to happen here. Oh my goodness, I'm not sure. Like, I can sit here and have a very, open conversation. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to participate in what's called pre-practicum 2 in my clinical mental health counseling program, working on my master's degree in mental health counseling. And we have to go sit on site, and we have to demonstrate counseling skills, and we have to be recorded. And, so I'm working with a lot of my classmates right now who are all very anxious about this, what's going to happen? How do I prepare? How do I get ready? How do I, and it's, and I'm sitting here saying, I'm just open to whatever this experience has to teach me. And, there is anxiety, right? These things come forward naturally. Of course they come forward. Why? Because the mind doesn't know what's going to happen. And the mind is discomforted by not knowing. And so rather than suggesting to the mind, just shut up, right? You just say, oh, that's okay, mind. That's okay. It's okay to not know. It's okay to have some anxiety. It's okay to be fearful. It's okay. Now the mind feels safe. And because the mind feels safe, it's no longer railing against the experience. I used to say it this way. I used to say, imagine that you have a small child, right? And this small child is crying out for attention. If you just tell the child to shut up and go away, that's going to create a certain set of circumstances, right? But if you meet the child with love and kindness and tenderness and a willingness to be present for that child, it's going to have a different kind of experience. And when the child cries out, over and over and over again, and every time the child is met with love, eventually the child's going to realize that it no longer needs to cry out. This is the experience the opportunity for the experience we have on ourselves. If you're gentle and tender and loving and kind with yourself each and every time you watch yourself respond with anxiousness and fear and see the worst possible things happen in the experience, and you can just say, it's okay. And pat yourself on the back, give yourself a hug. Yeah, that's okay. It's okay to not know. It's okay to be fearful. It's okay to have anxiety. And it loosens the bonds. It lessens the impact that these things have on us. And in that process, we're also working within the domain of surrender. So this is the dance of fear and surrender. It's acknowledging and recognizing the fear and surrendering that fear into a deeper sense of trust and faith in the way of things. Yeah. In understanding and recognizing the inherent perfection or the intelligent aliveness of life, and to giving ourselves over to that. That's surrender, to give ourselves over to that, to give ourselves over to the absolute beauty of not knowing. That's true surrender, very deep and profound surrender. Yeah. I know people who they will interpret this term of surrender in terms of saying, I need to surrender this emotion or this feeling, or I need to surrender this thought or this idea, or I need to surrender this pattern or this. Right? And that's one way we can go about doing it. Right? But when we're in that mode of surrender, what we're surrendering is the thing. What we're surrendering is the thing. And since no thing can actually be found in the experience of not knowing, then the thing that we're trying to surrender doesn't actually exist. And so what we're surrendering is an individuated illusion. Right? What I'm suggesting is that we not surrender individuated illusions, but we inquire into the one who it is that is doing the surrendering. Who is this one? What is this thing called surrender? And where is it emerging out of? What is it that's really happening? And when we really look in that way, we begin to acknowledge the patterns of mind, the individuated thought of I, the I, me, mine that's sort of at the center of the whole illusion. And that's where the surrender has to occur, is in the surrender of believing in the separateness. That's not in the things, but in the one who is here at the center of it all. That's where the surrender occurs. That's where real surrender. It's very easy to surrender an attachment to a thing. Yeah. Well, some people will say that's not easy, but I would say there's a big difference between surrendering an attachment to a thing and surrendering attachment to your self-identification. There are many people who say to me, especially people who've come from Buddhist paths, they're like, oh, but the Buddha taught detachment, closing the doors of sense perception. And I'm like, well, yes, of course he did. Because he's trying to get you to remove yourself from the world long enough to recognize what's more deeply true than the world. Yeah. But if you think it's all the detachment is the end state, then that you're just attached to that idea. There's no intimacy in being detached from everything. What we're really being forced into in those scenarios is, let's say, you confronted with the idea that no separate self exists and that your entire identity is invested in a mirage, right? And the first thing that does is inspire a great fear or even a resentment, right? That's not true. I know who I am, right? The way that we're responding to that is it's a mechanic of distancing ourselves from a willingness to hear the truth of what's really happening in our lives. And for a moment there, I had something else that I was going to say, but it seems to have escaped me. So I'm just gonna land it there, and I'll open it up at this point because I've used for a bit of time here to continue to talk. I think I've said pretty much everything I want to about the dance of fear and surrender, acknowledging the fears, right? And surrendering the separate I, me, mine that has them, or just being really present with all of it, just really intimate with all of life, with everything that life is presenting. So let me open it up here and we can have a little bit of conversation. Elliot, you're the only one I've got on Zoom, but I can see I've got 4 people here on Facebook. So if you have a question on Facebook, please feel free to type in the comments area and we can dive into anything that you might have a question about. These themes, while I'm waiting for Facebook to catch up here, these themes are dominant themes in whatever religious or philosophical tradition you may honor. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian, a Buddhist, a Taoist, a Muslim, an atheist. It really doesn't matter. If you're devoted to science, if you're devoted to psychology, somewhere in that tradition is this theme of surrender. It's right there. It permeates any realm of wisdom. It's essential to all forms of wisdom. And so if anything I'm saying is like, I don't agree with that, or that's not consistent with what my church says or what my teacher says, what I can say is take the tradition that you're in and research the topic of non-duality within the context of what you already honor. And what you'll begin to discover is that there's a sacred heart at the center of every tradition, of every religion, of every philosophy. And the sacred heart itself is the same in each and every one. There are these memes that I used to see on Facebook, right, where you would have, it was a picture of like Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and a couple of them, they're all sitting around a table and they're looking down at earth and they're talking about how none of their followers get it. But meanwhile, they're all on board, right? They're all in complete agreement with, what they discovered within themselves. I'm not seeing any questions come up, which is fine. What I will do, here's the offer that I'll make. If you're watching this, if you're online now and you don't have a question, that's fine. If something comes up for you later, or if you're watching this online, okay? What I would ask you to do is, over the course of the next week or two, go to awakeningintolife.com and click on the events, and you'll see this campaign of consciousness there. And there's an email address, I think, if I remember correctly. Just send me your question, right? Whatever questions you may have, whether it's related to the conversation we've been having or not, that's all fine. Whatever questions you have, what I'll do is at the end of, let's say at the end of a 2-week period, I'll collect all the questions and I'll just record one single video that's in response to any question that comes. So by that, what I'm suggesting is you have this opportunity on that website, in that location. Every video from the series is there. From the first video on tilting in the direction of awakening, which was a little clunky because it's only audio, and somebody had their mic open at the beginning, so there's some background noise at the very beginning of it. But that's there. Every single talk that's been given in this series, it's all right there on the website. So you're invited to go and go through these videos on your own time, at your own pace. And if you discover anything that you feel is a question, or something that you just want to get more information about, just send it all to me in an email, and I'll record sort of a closing conversation to address any sort of any threads that have been left unwoven, we could say. So that's what I would ask of anyone who has a question, or even if you have a point that you want to make, right? Or an idea or something you want to present.
You want to end with a portion of a poem that I wrote?
Sure, why not, Elliot? I'd be happy to hear that.
All right. Okay, so this is I think I mentioned I spent 6 years with this great sage in India, and he was there in physical form, but you could never see his personality the way you can see people's personality. So this is the last 2 verses of the poem because it's a long poem.
Okay.
So and yet there's no one there. Oh, the poem is called A Useless Man.
I love it already.
And yet there's no one there. He can't be found. He's beyond time and space, beyond light and sound. There's no one there. He can't be found unless roots sink deep into the ground. There's no one there. He can't be found unless knowledge knows and love abounds. There's no one there. He can't be found because he's everywhere. He's all around. Yes, he can't be found. There's no one there. But if you're drowning in despair, he'll fill your cup even as you weep and lift you up with love so deep, you know for sure he's not apart. He's there embedded in your heart. With love so sweet and love so tender, he's found forever in surrender.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Elliot. That's really beautiful. And I think that is a perfect summation of what the whole series is really about. This is beautiful. This comes from a place that's very deep, right? This is the invitation.
Yeah.
This is the invitation.
Yeah.
For anyone watching this video, this is the invitation. Okay, here, hang on one second. There is a question. All right. I still say that that's a wonderful place to leave it. So for anyone listening, just allow those words to be the last words that really permeate your experience right now. I will answer this question. Yeah, so the question here is, do you think the use of psychedelics for exploration of consciousness is wrong? And my answer is absolutely not. Matter of fact, I would say, if you go back and you look at the video that I did as part of the series on mindfulness and meditation, the last part of that video deals specifically with psychedelics. Um, and just to briefly recap on that, there are what we could call, neuroscientists would call it the default mode network of the brain structure, right? There's other language that they might use. But this default mode network these are the conditioned patterns that the brain has been, formed to accommodate, right? Through all kinds of experience, right? So neurons that fire together, wire together, that being an old saying. So over the course of our lives, certain neuro patterns have been established within the structures of the brain. Right. And so that's generally what governs, we could say conscious, unconscious, but that, those structures, those brain structures they play an important role. Let's put it that way. I want to be careful because I also want to make sure that we understand that brain is created by language. But anyway, and the distinction called brain is actually a lingual definition or lingual abstraction. But anyway, so this default mode network, one of the things that can happen, we can have moments of tragedy that will, really blow wide open the default mode network. We can use meditative techniques in a way that will help open up or alter those default mode networks, or we can use psychedelics or other types of substances. And, there's been a lot of neuroscientific study on this topic, especially over the last few years, of how do psychedelics alter the systems and structures of the brain in a way that allows for, we could say, non-normal states of consciousness, right? Or altered states of consciousness. And there are some visionaries that have really done a tremendous amount of work in this particular area. I would say Stan Grof is a wonderful example of somebody who's devoted his whole life to the exploration and study of non-ordinary states of consciousness, right? He and his wife also created holotropic breath work, right, as a way of offering a substitute to psychedelic substances that has pretty much the same potential. Let's say, it's different, but ultimately its purpose is the same in terms of breaking down those default mode networks, providing alternative experiential points of reference so that we can begin to adapt our thinking mind in the direction of something that's less dependent on thought. Which, I know that's a little paradoxical to hear in that way, but that's really the way it works. So psychedelics, are a way of breaking wide open the fact that we're living in an abstraction. So you can take a psychedelic substance, and I know I participated in an ayahuasca ceremony a couple of years ago. For me, I tell people all the time, it was just a great big hug, right? But I had already had this very powerful opening experience, and I had spent months being emptied out, right? Held upside down and shaken so that all of the bullshit would fall out, as I like to say. And so, going into the use of a psychedelic substance, it didn't really necessarily have anything to reveal to me. Everything had already been experienced that needed to be experienced. So the psychedelic itself was like a great big hug. However, the people that I was with and the people that were around me, when we did the processing the next day, people were reporting ego deaths. They were reporting, these very transcendent sort of experiences. And the dominant theme was they were exposed to some other way of seeing. And they were trying to make sense, right? Because the mind is always trying to make sense of things. So they were in their minds trying to make sense of their experience. And so I was sort of just pointing that out to people, just sort of having it. To me, it was all just a wonderful adventure, right? It was a curiosity. How could I talk about psychedelic substances with people who want to discuss them if I haven't tried them myself, right? I need to understand what they elicit within the experience of our being in order to be able to speak experientially about them. I don't speak about anything in these sessions that isn't experiential. What would be the point, right? So, it was important for me to expose myself to some of these kinds of substances. And I think they can be profoundly helpful. We are also seeing, again, I'm working on a counseling master's degree. We are seeing within the field of psychology, within the field of counseling, that these sort of medicines, these substances can be absolutely profoundly life altering when it comes to dealing with trauma. I seem to remember referencing a documentary on Netflix, I think it was, or something like that, in the meditation video. There was a documentary that I referred to there. They were using MDMA, if I remember correctly. And you have two trained PhD therapists that spend several sessions preparing this person for their MDMA experience. These are people who went through such tremendous. If you watch the documentary, I mean, it's heartbreaking to see what people have been through. I know it was almost unbearable for me to watch what they had been through. But then they go through the use of the substance. There's just this they encounter their pain in a way they've never been able to encounter it before as a result of the substance. And because they're able to process what they went through within the sort of the safety of that experience, they're able to relinquish that pain, and it has an incredibly profound effect. When I'm done with my master's program, I intend to go into a PhD program in transpersonal psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And one of the things that I like about CIIS is the fact that they have a year-long program that they offer in psychedelic studies, and that's something that I want to add on to my work through them. I just think that this is a realm of opportunity for greater degrees of healing. And the other thing that I would say here about psychedelic substances is to approach them with the intentionality of healing, to approach them with the intentionality of the invitation, right, into exploration. If we approach these substances as if we're going to have a good time or a party, or we're just going to ingest some goodies and then we're going to go out and have a night on the town, these attitudes and intentions are what ultimately lead people to have what we might call a bad trip. Because these are they're really not meant for that. I mean, that's just not their purpose. These are sacred instruments, and they've been used for thousands of years, and as I think Tim Leary and Ram Dass and some of the folks in that crowd would say, set and setting, right, is important. Making sure that you have a guide, right? Somebody who's been through it, somebody who's able to process. As I was mentioning earlier, the holotropic breathwork program, right? So that's a program that I'm also very interested in. It takes you have to go through several different programs of study in order to be certified as a breathworker within the holotropic breathwork system. And much of the training is about preparing you to be with people as they experience the undealt with and unprocessed traumas and all of the things that are going to come up and emerge psychologically, physically, energetically, however you might frame it. It's all the stuff that needs to come forward. And if you're not properly prepared to be present with somebody who has to experience things that have been abandoned or buried for years, you're not going to be able to help them in a way that's really helpful. Most of us, if we haven't really received any formal kind of training in what offering real help is, we're trying to fix a problem, right? We perceive and attempt to fix a problem. Let me take your pain away. That's what we're trying to do. But any kind of real healing of work actually requires that we allow people to have their pain, that we allow them to really fully embody the terror, the horror, the absolute burden, right? We have to be able to give people the space to encounter all of the tragedy that has shaped and formed and molded and limited them. And if we're not if we haven't gone through these things ourselves, and if we haven't received the appropriate training to do this kind of work, it's, we're not necessarily in the best position to help or aid people. So it's a good idea to work with someone who has been in this place. Find somebody who's a shaman, or somebody who's really got a lot of practical experience with some of these substances. So the question now is, can you offer some reliable links to explore healing catalysts to awaken via psychedelics, places, experienced persons? Thank you. I'm going to step away from that question, just because I think there's a lot of material out there already on the internet, and it's not my area of expertise. And it's, I am, while I value their potential, right, and I see them as a useful tool, I would not encourage anyone to take that route. I would actually encourage people to breathe into the heart, to do the inner examination without the substances. If they're going to be a part of your journey, they're going to be a part of your journey. I would never discourage their use, but I also don't encourage their use unless it's under very tightly controlled conditions. And I don't really, unless I have my own sort of direct knowledge of someone's capacities, I'm largely disinclined to promote them because I really don't know. And I've seen people who have been, we could say, who have suggested they are very well trained, who then, because their interest is more in the substance than in the truth, they're actually encouraging a degree of dependency upon the substances. I've seen that quite a bit too. So I really would, I'm going to back away from that question because I don't feel like I have an answer for that. What I would say is you can do your research online and look and see what the options are, and investigate that, the buyer beware sort of model. It's a wonderful question. I don't want to be dismissive of the question. It's more just my interest is how to engage people to do this work within themselves without the need for any sort of external component. That's what I'm encouraging. If these substances come forward in your life, so be it. I think they can be very valuable, but it's not where I would point people. I have an interest in it because of its clinical and therapeutic value, but in a very tightly controlled setting. What else? Yeah, thank you. Great. Yeah. I said, I don't want to be dismissive. I usually prefer to answer people's questions very fully, but that one, maybe not so much. You have to also keep in mind the legalities of the society we live in. So, yeah. All right. Well, again, I really want to, for anybody listening, to the video recording, I'd say, before you step away from your computer after listening to this, rewind a few minutes and listen to Elliot's little closing conversation points there from his poem, because that's a much more beautiful way of sort of wrapping up this whole series, right? Because this is, my goodness, this is about discovering the totality of your own being. This is about discovering the love that you are, not a word, not a concept, not an idea, not a feeling, but your absolute essential being. Yeah. And your absolute essential being is it's not just you and your idea of yourself. It's not just you. You're not alone. It's so much bigger than anything you can imagine. And the only way to really discover it within yourself is to let yourself go. Yeah, in a really gentle, really beautiful, really humble way. to let yourself go, to surrender everything that you're holding on to, everything that you're clinging to, everything that you're attached to, letting it all go in favor of this truth, of the mystery of being, the aliveness of life itself. And that's why my website is called Awakening into Life. We're awakening into life itself, as life itself. That's the invitation. So what Elliot shared there was really a perfect summarization of what this journey is about. And with that, it's really all I have for this evening. So I just want to say thank you all for allowing me to be a part of your journey. The last 7 weeks have been wonderful. Don't forget that there is an opportunity still at the end of the series to do a private one-on-one session, just to connect and see how things are going. If there's anything that you took away from this, or if there's anything else you'd like clarity on, or so there's still that opportunity. I'd also like to take a moment to plug, on the 22nd of December, I think it is, which is a Sunday, same time, right, 8 o'clock Eastern. I'm going to do a discussion on the life and teachings of Jesus, right, to really, bring this figure from history into the present moment from the perspective of awakened non-dual wisdom, and to highlight a lot of the ways in which we culturally limit or socially or religiously limit the potential of his teachings, and the lived expression, right, of his own surrender and sacrifice, right, to really understand what was at work for him in his own experience of his humanness, right. Often we take figures like Jesus and we elevate them, right, to a position of divinity, which makes it really convenient to say, well, I can't do what he did because I'm just a person, I'm just a human being. And he wasn't, he was the divine son, right? And it's sort of like, yeah, but you've missed the point. If you elevate a person beyond your ability to meet what they were inviting you into, you've sort of defeated the entire message that they were offering. So it's just an opportunity to explore the life and the teachings of a man who discovered something so deeply within himself that he gave everything in service of it. So it's we talk about surrender. It's a great example. So again, I love you all. Thank you so much for these last 7 weeks.
Thank you so much, Bradley.
Yeah. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.